What are we supposed to do when someone crosses the line? When a look turns into contempt, when a word cuts like a blade, when someone's silence strips us of the respect we deserve? Are we meant to stay calm? Stay composed? Act maturely? In theory, it all sounds so clear, so noble, almost spiritual. But in practice, it's different. Practice is messy. It burns with anger, shame, and that trembling in your hands you didn't ask for. Because sometimes, it's not what they say that hurts the most, it's the echo it leaves behind. The storm it triggers inside. What it puts at risk. Your image, your standing, your strength. We live in a time that glorifies sensitivity, empathy, and self-care. And that's not a bad thing. But at the same time, we ignore a brutal truth. Some people feed off weakness. There are people who, when you don't react, don't admire your inner peace. They read your silence as surrender. And then they feel entitled to step on you again. Not out of need, but out of habit. Out of pleasure. Out of sport. Not everyone sees respect as something sacred. Some only offer it when they fear the consequences. And that's exactly where Machiavelli's uncomfortable perspective comes in. A lens that doesn't ask for permission to make you uncomfortable, because truth, more often than not, is uncomfortable. Machiavelli wasn't writing for the soft-hearted or the naive dreamers. He spoke about what really moves the world: power, perception, control. And while his work has been called cynical or ruthless for centuries, what it really contains is a brutal kind of clarity. Especially when it comes to how we deal with being disrespected. Because let's be honest, how many times have we stayed quiet just to avoid conflict? How many times have we forgiven too quickly, only to get hurt all over again? How many times have we told ourselves that keeping the peace was the right thing to do, when in reality we were just giving more ground away? Machiavelli doesn't ask us to become monsters. He asks us to stop acting like prey. He understood that dignity isn't something you beg for. It's something you protect. Not with desperate outbursts, but with smart decisions. Not with drama, but with calculated, firm actions. When someone disrespects you, it's not enough to feel hurt. And it's not enough to raise your voice and demand attention. What matters is that your response leaves no doubt. It came at a cost. The person who dared to cross that line should know, they didn't do it for free. They weren't dealing with someone defenseless, but with someone who, even in silence, knows exactly how to stand their ground. Machiavellian logic may feel cold at first, but when you've been wounded too many times, by trusting, by staying quiet, by always giving in, that coldness starts to feel like medicine. Because it's not about turning into someone harsh or cruel. It's about becoming someone who no longer lets other people's behavior define their worth. Someone who no longer reacts on impulse, but responds with strategy. Because the truth is, not every attack deserves a quick response. Sometimes the smartest move is to wait, to observe. Time, as Machiavelli would say, is the greatest ally of those who know how to think before they act. Picture yourself in a meeting. Someone throws a passive-aggressive jab your way, hidden behind a polite smile. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, just enough to not make it awkward. But inside, something burns. You wonder if you should say something. Is it worth it? What if you speak up and seem insecure? What if you stay quiet and this happens again tomorrow? What's at stake isn't just your pride. It's your image, your presence, your place in the room. Machiavelli would tell you, don't react yet. Make your move impossible to ignore. Not with yelling. Not with tears. With strategy. With the kind of response that doesn't repeat. Because it teaches. Because it warns. Because the one who struck you understands, without needing another word, that you're not an easy target. That your silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. That your delay wasn't doubt, it was preparation. That's what we forget so often. Respect isn't something you request, it's something you project. Not through violence, but through presence. Through boundaries. Through the way you carry yourself. In a world where everyone wants to look kind, Machiavelli reminds us, it's just as important to look strong. Because kindness, without respect, is worthless. Forgiveness, when expected, loses its meaning. And peace that comes at the cost of your dignity isn't peace at all. It's surrender. Maybe that's why his words still hit home for those who've been betrayed, mocked, or underestimated. Because Machiavelli never promised justice. He didn't preach patience. He taught how to think like someone who has already accepted the truth. The world doesn't always reward the kindest, it often rewards the sharpest. The ones who know when to speak and when to stay silent. When to forgive and when to draw the line. When to be kind and when to stop letting the unforgivable go unpunished. And yes, all this might sound harsh, but there's something deeply freeing in knowing you can stand up for yourself without losing yourself. That you can protect your space without turning into a mirror of the person who hurt you. Because real strength isn't about yelling louder or hitting back harder. It's about taking control of the game. About not letting yourself get dragged into dynamics that shrink you, drain you, wear you down. It's about reclaiming your voice, even if you only use it once. Even if you use it softly, but in a way no one forgets. Maybe that's the most powerful takeaway from Machiavelli when it comes to respect. It's not about winning every fight. It's about choosing which ones are worth it. And when you choose to engage, you make sure it leaves a mark. Not for revenge. For balance. Not out of pride. Out of survival. Because the person who never stands up for themselves ends up living in the shadow of who they could have been. But the one who learns to do it, even silently, walks through life with a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. The kind that doesn't need to shout, because it already speaks for itself. Sometimes, it's not the insult itself that hurts the most, it's what it triggers inside us. The memory of other times. Old wounds. Moments when we stayed quiet for too long and no one stepped in to stand up for us. The pain isn't new, it's layered, cumulative. And that's why disrespect isn't just a single act. It's a threat that touches something deep, something ancient. It's like a sudden reminder that the world is still a place where you have to fight to protect your space. Because if you don't, no one else will. The idea that everything can be solved through mutual understanding is beautiful, but fragile. Not because we shouldn't aspire to it, but because not everyone plays by those rules. Some people only respect what they're afraid to lose. They only weigh their actions when they know someone is capable of setting real boundaries, not just saying pretty words. That's one of the hardest lessons to learn. No matter how much patience and compassion we try to cultivate, there are moments when we have to stand our ground, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Machiavelli didn't write to be liked. He wrote so you wouldn't be destroyed. He didn't speak from morality, but from his understanding of power, politics, and human nature at its rawest. He understood that many relationships are built not only on affection, but on perceived strength. And sometimes, it's safer to seem harsh than to seem weak. Not because it's fair, but because that's how human nature works when instinct overrides reason. When someone disrespects us, the first thing we need to avoid is reacting out of wounded pride. Because knee-jerk reactions are usually emotional, clumsy, and fueled by a need for validation. But Machiavelli would say it plainly. If you act from your wound, you lose control of the game. Real power lies in the one who can pause, observe, and respond with strategy, not rage. That doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means acknowledging the pain, but deciding what to do with it. Turning it into clarity, into strength, into direction. Because the person who disrespects you might just be testing your limits. And if they don't see those limits, they'll keep crossing them. That's why your response doesn't have to be immediate, but it does need to be firm. So they understand they're not dealing with someone fragile or passive, but with someone who has learned to guard their dignity like sacred ground. A lot of people think self-respect is purely internal. And in some ways, it is. But it's also something you show outwardly. It's in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you end a conversation when it turns toxic, the way you walk away without explaining yourself. It's that quiet energy that says, you don't get to treat me like that, even if you never say a word. Because real authority doesn't need to shout. You can feel it. Machiavelli saw the world as a battlefield of forces. And in that space, those who don't project power become easy targets. That's why he warned it's sometimes wiser to appear intimidating than to appear kind. Because kindness without strength can look like submission. And no one respects what looks like it's there to be stepped on. It sounds harsh, but the human soul doesn't always respond to love. Sometimes, it responds to the fear of losing something valuable. And if you don't see yourself as valuable, others won't either. It's easy to fall into the trap of making excuses for people who hurt us. Telling ourselves maybe it wasn't that bad, Maybe we're overreacting, maybe it's not worth the drama. But that kind of thinking, repeated over and over, slowly hollows us out. We become experts at giving in, at smiling while swallowing our anger, at shrinking ourselves just to avoid rejection. But Machiavelli forces us to ask, at what cost? How many times will you trade your dignity for the illusion of peace built on silence? There's something deeply healing about deciding you're done tolerating the intolerable, about looking at someone who's hurt you with calm, but with a kind of clarity that strips away their power, about walking away without saying a word, letting them sit in the silence of their own reflection. Not because you want revenge, but because you finally understand that self-respect is a way of surviving, and also a way of teaching the world how to treat you. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you cultivate in the way you carry yourself, the boundaries you draw, the consistency between what you feel and what you allow. And that's something we often learn the hard way. Because every insult we ignore, every joke at our expense we laugh off, every time we let someone shrink us without speaking up, we give them unspoken permission to do it again. Machiavelli reminds us we're not meant to be victims forever, that there's something profoundly human about protecting yourself, about saying enough, about no longer handing yourself over to people who don't know how to take care of what they're given. His message isn't about bitterness, it's about awakening, about clarity, that moment when you stop waiting for others to change and start taking responsibility for your place in the world. Not from hate, but from self-respect. Not from violence, but from vision. People around you might not understand that change right away. Some might even resent it. But when you change how you treat yourself, the world starts to change how it treats you too. You become more selective, more grounded, quieter if you have to be, because you no longer need to prove anything. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be whole, to find peace, but not the kind that costs you your dignity. And if that means losing a few people along the way, so be it. Because any relationship built on the erosion of your worth isn't a relationship at all. And if that means some people start calling you cold or distant because they don't recognize this new version of you, that's okay too. You weren't born to please. You were born to live with truth, with strength, with the kind of presence that quietly says, I have limits too. I deserve respect. And this time, I won't just let it slide. Maybe the biggest mistake we make when someone disrespects us is thinking that if we don't react, the situation will just fade away. That if we take a deep breath and keep moving, the contempt will eventually dissolve. But what we fail to see, what we choose not to see, is that every time we tolerate the intolerable, something inside us dims. A quiet part, but an essential one. The part that remembers our worth. The part that holds us up when everything around us tries to make us small. It's not pride that gets wounded when someone humiliates us, it's our awareness of being. The deep belief that we deserve to be treated with dignity. And when that breaks, the soul gets lost. Suddenly we don't know if our feelings are justified, if we're overreacting, or if we're just too sensitive. And that doubt, that fog, is the perfect environment for people to keep hurting us without us even realizing it. But then comes a turning point. The moment, brief but powerful, when something shifts. Sometimes it's triggered by a tiny, almost meaningless offense, but it falls on top of a mountain of silences we've piled up. Other times, it's a brutal act of disrespect from someone we trusted. The trigger doesn't matter. What matters is that in that moment, we finally understand. We can't keep being accomplices in our own wounding. We can't keep giving respect to someone who only gives us emptiness in return. If we want to heal, we first have to stop surrendering in the places where we've always been. That's where the voice of Machiavelli hits like a thunderclap. He doesn't tell us to be cruel or vengeful or ruthless. What he tells us, bluntly and clearly, is to stop being naive, to open our eyes and see the world not as we wish it were, but as it is. We can't walk through life assuming everyone has the same level of awareness, empathy, or concern about not causing harm. Because not everyone does. In fact, some feed off other people's weakness. They grow stronger when we stay silent. They feel superior when we step back. So knowing who we are isn't enough. We have to act like someone who knows. Not with arrogance, but with strength. Not to dominate others, but to make sure others don't dominate us. And that takes a different kind of courage. Not the kind that yells. Not the kind that punches. but the kind that can hold its ground under pressure. The kind that knows when to walk away without saying a word. The kind that doesn't need threats to make it clear, not with me. Never again. That quiet strength redefines our relationships. It creates a new, invisible contract with the world. It says, you can be near me, but not if your presence strips me of the respect I owe myself. It's a shift that can make people uncomfortable, sure, because it means unlearning everything we were taught about being nice, keeping the peace, or sacrificing ourselves for the sake of harmony. But sometimes, keeping the peace is a form of self-betrayal. Sometimes, that peace we're so eager to maintain is just the mask of a deeper abandonment, abandoning ourselves. Machiavelli didn't offer comfort. He offered clarity. And sometimes that clarity stings, because it makes us see how many times we bowed down to people who didn't even deserve our time. How often we stayed quiet out of fear, out of habit, out of emotional dependence. How many times we called it patience, when really it was fear of losing the affection of someone who had already stopped caring a long time ago. But there's something freeing in that truth. Because once we accept it, we stop acting from resentment. We stop waiting for apologies that will never come. We just change. We become more alert, more grounded, more intentional. We stop saying yes, just to avoid being alone. We stop laughing off cruel jokes. We stop justifying behaviors that, deep down, we know are hurting us. We finally learn how to say no. Not just with words, but with choices. Respect, then, stops being something we beg for. It becomes a way of life. A way of walking. A presence you can feel without trying. Someone who respects themselves doesn't need to constantly defend their value. They don't need to prove anything. Their energy alone says, I know who I am. And I won't shrink to make you comfortable. That kind of security isn't forced, it radiates. And of course, some people will say it's too much. That you're being dramatic. That it wasn't a big deal. But those voices often come from people who benefited from your old self. The one who stayed quiet, who always gave in, who didn't know their own worth. Losing their approval? That's a blessing in disguise. Because every time you choose yourself over the fear of being misunderstood, you rebuild your life from a place that's stronger, truer. Maybe that's the real message behind Machiavelli, the one most people are too afraid to look at directly. We weren't put on this earth to please everyone, or to be understood by all. We're here to take up space. And that space isn't earned through misplaced humility or submission. It's earned through awareness. Through the decision to no longer let fear of rejection erode your self-respect. There will be days when setting those boundaries feels like a loss. But over time, you'll realize it's actually freedom. That every time you stand up for yourself, something within aligns. Something finds its place. And while it might hurt at first, that pain slowly transforms into peace. A different kind of peace. One that doesn't need approval, or permission, or explanation. A peace that comes from knowing you no longer betray yourself. That you no longer offer yourself to people who don't know how to care. That you finally learn it. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you live. You embody it. You protect it. And when that happens, something powerful shifts. You're not the same anymore. You no longer walk with your head down. You don't flinch when someone raises their voice. You don't beg for affection that feels like charity. Because something inside you has stood up. And once your soul stands up, no one can ever treat it like it's kneeling again.